hundreds of complex diagrams, thousands of tricky names, and countless adverse effects, drug interactions, and contraindications. These are just a few reasons why people usually hate pharmacology. And I get it, I used to hate pharm too, but over time, with a lot of experimentation, I ended up finding strategies that made the subject much easier. And believe it or not, pharmacology eventually became one of my strong suits. So today I want to share how you can achieve this too. We'll dive into evidence-based study techniques, practical tips from my own experience, and some pro tips to help you finally tackle pharmacology. Alright, so the first thing to know about pharmacology is that it has two types of content, and each needs to be learned differently. First, there are the principles, things like bioavailability, half-life, volume of distribution, and the Landgraf plots. Then there are the drugs and their details. Here we have the antihypertensives, antibiotics, antidepressants, anticonvulsants, basically all the antis, and their respective mechanisms of actions, indications, side effects, etc, etc. Now, the key to mastering the principles is to understand them, which I know sounds simple enough, right? But many people struggle with this part because they rely too heavily on memorization. And yes, pharmacology does require a ton of memorization. But not here. If you don't genuinely understand these foundational concepts, everything that detaches or builds on them will just feel like more arbitrary info to memorize. And trust me, that's the last thing you want in pharm. Several strategies can help you learn these principles more effectively. My top two are elaborative encoding and active processing with short recall. That last one is very straightforward. Instead of keeping your notes open while you study, try this. Close your notes, read a couple of paragraphs from the text, then close it, think about what you just read, and once you review the info in your mind, go ahead and jot it down from memory. It's not the fastest approach, I know, but it forces you to actually process what you're reading, which strengthens understanding and retention. Elaborative encoding, on the other hand, involves asking questions that help you make sense of what you're reading and give it meaning. Useful ones include how does this work, why is this like this, and perhaps the most valuable in pharm, which is why the heck am I learning this? Answering these questions isn't always easy, and sometimes a concept won't just click. In those cases, try looking at how it's tested. This saved me countless times. I particularly remember how it helped me with the Landgraf plots, because I don't know about you, but when I studied them, I thought, okay, yeah, this is a line, it's an inverse function, but why do I actually need to know this? It wasn't until I looked at practice questions that I realized these graphs are just there to test my understanding of how drug interactions affect parameters like Vmax. Once I understood that, the concept suddenly made a lot more sense. This technique, which is called reverse learning, is very easy to apply with Lecturio, because in Lecturio you can search for practice questions on topics you're reading by just going to the specific concept page and clicking start. That'll give you a set of practice questions on that topic specifically, helping you get a sense of what's essential and how it's going to be tested. Now, when it comes to learning the drugs and their details, my advice is to approach it gradually and in layers. You see, many students start pharmacology trying to master everything at once. So if they're studying, let's say, antihypertensives, they dive straight to learn the 10 ACE inhibitors, 16 beta blockers, 8 calcium channel blockers with every detail of each one of them. This just doesn't work. It's like attempting a reverse park on a steep hill on your very first driving lesson. It's overwhelming, and in the end, it's counterproductive. That's why I don't particularly love pharmacology textbooks, especially for beginners, because they're filled with way too much detail and way too much information. Instead, I think that it's better to just focus on the essentials first, learn them well, and then gradually layer in the extra details as needed. Lecturio helps a lot here because it filters the information down to the essentials, the concepts and details every doctor should know. You can start with that and build as needed as you encounter more in your practice. Now, these tips alone will simplify about 80% of pharmacology, but that last 20%, the really complex stuff like antibiotics, anticonvulsants, anesthetics, that will need a bit of extra effort. For these tricky topics, I recommend a method called spaced learning, which no, it's not the same as spaced repetition. Spaced learning is all about breaking up study sessions. So instead of cramming 6 hours in one afternoon, you study for 2 hours across 3 different days. This slower approach works better because it strengthens what you learn. It's like layering paint on a wall. If you do it right, each new layer reinforces the last. but if you rush it, you'll just end up smudging over the previous code. Now, the specific approach for each session depends on the drug class. For instance, with antibiotics, I'd begin by learning the main families, the mechanisms of action, and a couple of key agents from each family. That first session would be like stepping back to see the big picture. It helps you build a strong foundation, which makes learning all the related details easier down the line. But a warning, try to make sure you really master this big picture before you jump to the next sessions. The last thing you want is to start learning a bunch of details on drugs you really haven't organized in your head. My recommendation to ensure this is that every day between the first and second session, you practice some form of active retrieval of the information. Research has shown that this strategy is way more effective at improving retention compared to techniques like re-studying the material, taking notes, creating mind maps, highlighting, and it's actually really easy. Anything that forces you to actively recall the material can work. So, for example, grabbing a blank piece of paper and writing what you remember, that works, doing flashcard works, or even trying to explain the topic out loud with the Feynman technique works as well here. Now, once this layer is set, I would move on to sessions 2 and 3, where I would learn all the other important details like the spectrum, the indications, adverse effects, etc, etc. So for antibiotics, that's the strategy, but for a drug class like antimuscarinics, I'd use a totally different approach. I'd start by understanding the physiology first in the first session, because I believe that if that is clear, the indications and adverse effects, all of that will make a lot more sense, and I would need to memorize that information. I'll just be able to deduce it. So those are just a couple of examples, but with a bit of experience, you'll also start learning the best approach for each different drug class on your own. Now, another technique that's invaluable for memorizing large, complex drug families is the mind palace. I wish I'd learned about this sooner because it's been a game changer for me, especially for very difficult drug classes like the antiretrovirals. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into mind palaces here, but we'll be posting a video example on this topic next month, so stay tuned if you want to learn more on that. And besides these techniques, I always try to look for ways to make learning easier for me. For instance, instead of memorizing all the factor Xa inhibitors at once, I just start with a couple and remember the general rule that drugs that have an XA, a 10A in the name, are factor Xa inhibitors. Pharmacology has tons of little rules like that, you just have to keep an eye out for them. I also rely on logic, associations, and understanding over pure memorization. For example, going back to what we said a minute ago, if I understand very well the physiology of antimuscarinics, knowing they cause constipation and urinary retention is not really a memory thing, it's a logical thing, it's a deducible thing. Similarly, knowing that cephalosporins can lead to C. diff infections is easier if I understand the general concept that a C. diff infection is an antibiotic-induced diarrhea. That way, this is not another arbitrary memory thing I have to remember, just an example of a known principle. And these may sound like little things, but every concept you can recall through reasoning and principle instead of rote memorization will compound over time and will make your learning 10 times easier down the road. Finally, the last thing you should know is that even once you've learned something, you'll naturally start to forget it over time. That's why spaced repetition is so important. Flashcards are a quick and easy way to keep up, especially if you're preparing for a med school exam. You can create your own or use Lecturio pre-made quizzes, which are great because they pop up after each video and they also use an algorithm to help you review each concept right when you're about to forget it. For larger exams, like residency exams, I recommend focusing more on practice questions. Lecturio offers over 2,000 clinical cases for this, and you can filter them by subject. So if, for instance, you're struggling with, let's say, pharmacology, you can create a Q-Bank session just with pharmacology questions to strengthen your understanding of this topic for the test. Besides that, for general day-to-day knowledge, I believe everyday practice is the best source of spaced repetition stimuli. When I was in med school, for instance, I used to take advantage of every opportunity during any rotation to review topics I had learned before. So even if I was in a rotation that had nothing to do with a given topic, let's say I was in psychiatry and I noticed that my patient was on an antibiotic, I would try to take 20 seconds of my time to recall which class of antibiotic that drug belonged to and maybe how it worked and what it was used for. As I mentioned, this doesn't take a lot of time, but if done regularly, it has a huge impact on long-term retention of important information. And that's really it for this video. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you in the next one.